So it's a risky proposition if someone starts following those leads off the Facebook.
Advice on social media is a risky proposition.
At times.
If you go and see an advisor and they tell you there's no cost to you to be my client,
Run. Everybody wear the same shirt next week.
No, let's do it now. Get it done.
All right, get on with it.
welcome everybody to our latest edition of our Bugle Notes podcast. I'm Stephen Weitzel, Managing Partner here at Reveille Wealth Management, joined by two of my other colleagues and partners here today, Perdue, Michael Bennicelli. And the purpose of our discussion today is we're unpacking our recent white paper that Michael and I have authored about how to find the best financial advisor for you. And we often see people that are in search of a financial advisor and they're asking for leads or advice on who maybe they should speak with. And so we believe that it was in the best interest of investors out there for us to give them some general guidelines of things that they should be considering when interviewing financial advisors, knowing that most of them, they're not industry professionals. And so we want to give them some potential tips of things they may want to ask, ways they may want to phrase questions, really to make sure that the advisor that they're interviewing and the one that they settle on is the one that's really best for their situation. So let's just kind of jump in here. And so obviously this is the only job that I've ever had as being a financial advisor after I got out of school. And so I'm in my 19th year of doing this at this point in time.
All right.
And so, Michael, you and I have been in this industry since we got out of school. Now, obviously, you were on a different side of the fence than I was.
That's right.
Where you were not interfacing with clients directly, providing them with advice, but you've been interfacing with many advisors throughout your career.
Yeah, I was trying to think about this and kind of preparation for this today. Hundreds, if not thousands, of advisors that I've either worked with or around. And I guess in my experience, what's been interesting is you get to see the different types of financial advisors that are out there, the different types of firms that they work for, the different niches that some of them have that they've designed their business around. So we'll get into a lot of that, I think, as we go through this paper. But yeah, I've had a lot of experience with that. So.
Yeah, and for Joe, one of the things that's really unique about him within our firm is that where the rest of us have been doing this solely for the entirety of our careers, that before Joe came into the business 15 years ago, he had another career before that. He was a business owner before that, worked for large corporations. And so, Joe, you were a consumer of advice from the financial services industry and would have interviewed advisors. And so it's a really unique perspective as far as the rest of us are concerned, that you were a client of the industry before you came into it.
Yeah, 20 years in other industries when I came into the business. And certainly it was interesting seeing the business from outside versus learning how the sausage is made.
Yeah.
And I think that was, in the same way that, Michael reminds me when he talks about how many financial advisors he's worked with. As I started in the business 15 more years ago, that was the most important part of my education, I think, was seeing how different financial advisors do their job.
Yeah.
Interestingly, how many of them tend to think the way they do it is the right or best way, while it might be quite different than the person working next to them who maybe gets very similar results for their clients. But seeing it from that perspective is certainly educational, and I think speaks to what we're talking about today, this topic.
Yeah, and so and we'll definitely have a link to the white paper in the video here, but I just want to kind of unpack this, and that that begins with the question of I'm looking for a financial advisor, and we see these posts on social media where somebody says, who's the best financial advisor and just leaves it at that, and then you end up with this.
You get 30 comments in there of, financial advisor A, pick me, please.
Correct.
Come call me.
And people will maybe recommend their financial advisor, but all of that is done largely without any relevant information about who is this person that is soliciting feedback, what are their actual needs. And so, one of the first things that we say is that you need to, as an investor, you need to define yourself and you need to identify who you are and what your objectives are. The quick analogy that we made there is that asking for a financial advisor, it's not the same thing as asking where you get the oil changed in your vehicle, right? Not everybody has the same vehicle. And, maybe you have an antique car, maybe you have a luxury vehicle that not everybody works on. And so as soon as you start to qualify those things, all of a sudden the place that you would end up going for that service may be different. The people that you ask for recommendations may be different. It's not just a blanket ask to the crowd. So
I think there's two sides to it when it comes to the defining yourself, right? It's important for you in your search for a financial advisor because you're trying to find someone who works with folks like you, but it's important long term when you actually start working with the advisor because they're going to want to ask a bunch of questions about you and your situation and all of those things. And so the type of person you are, where you are in life, all of those things has a huge impact on the work that they do for you, right? The risk level you need to take, the different tax considerations, all those things. And that starts with you having an honest conversation with yourself about where you're at in life and what you look like and what your family situation is and all those things. So
yeah, and sometimes that conversation needs to be spurred from the conversation with the financial advisor.
Sure.
He needs to be adept enough to pull that out of you, even if you've not gone through it yourself.
Yeah. And I think part of this is also recognizing that not every financial advisor is the same, right? They have maybe different levels of experience or expertise, and it's not just a widget of this financial advisor would be equal to that financial advisor. And the objective behind this paper is to try to help people understand that there is a way for you to try to identify the advisor or advisory team that would be best suited to manage your personal situation. And the client is going to be able to arrive at that if they go through a more detailed interview process, if they know how to ask the questions.
Mm-hmm. And I think which speaks to the importance of some of the detail in what we're discussing today, because if you think about the typical social media post, we on principle, we never speak negatively about another financial advisor, but we generally get a feel, being in the business, for who's hardworking, smart people out there and who you probably would not consider. And when you see the social media responses, it's always kind of funny to see everyone's enthusiastically endorsing their financial advisor, basically.
Yeah.
With, like we said, no expertise on the person who initially asked the question, if their financial advisor is, number one, right for that person, number two, any good at all for anybody else. So it's a risky proposition if someone starts following those leads off the Facebook.
Advice on social media is a risky proposition
at times.
I will say this: one of the other things that I think a lot of people just that are consumers of the financial services industry, one of the, I don't know if it's a misconception or the way that you label it, would be that if there's a financial advisor that works for a certain firm, that somehow or another that firm has vetted that person as being successful in working with clients of a certain size or niche or whatever, and that they've signed off on their ability to sit in that seat and be value added to their clients. There isn't any of that.
Well, maybe not none, but very close to none.
Very little.
Certainly minimal.
I was going to ask that question. I had it in my notes here that I saw a study somewhat recently that said that people seeking an advisor tend to default to brand name as their first criteria. This was a Kitz's study, I think. And do you think that has any merit? Maybe in the past it did, because you could presume that there was a certain level of qualification with somebody that worked with a certain brand, but does that carry any weight anymore, in your opinion?
I think very little.
Yeah.
Very little. I would never advise someone to find a financial advisor based on the firm that they work for. I think every firm has very good and not good financial advisors there.
Yeah. I mean, I thought to myself, maybe in the past it made sense because you knew you were getting a certain level of education or whatever else, but the industry as a whole has gotten larger, and you even have large advisors now going off and starting their own wealth management firms because they want to be able to do things their own way, the right way, whatever it might be. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting dynamic to consider.
Well, the large firms, I know we've talked about this in some of our other podcasts, is that they want to have some level of control around the way that advisors work within their company. Mm-hmm. And so that's reasonable for some advisors who would say need more guardrails, if you want to present it that way. And for others that need more autonomy or flexibility to be able to serve the needs of their clients, that's why they go and they start their own firms. And it's not that one is necessarily better than the other, but ultimately, and we'll get into this in terms of the questions that a client would ask a prospective advisor that they might hire, is that the firm that an advisor is with really needs to stand to help the advisor best serve the client with whatever their needs are. So again, just kind of circling back here to the first objective that we would say for a client is they need to be able to identify their situation. And I would even spend time trying to write some of these things down instead of just saying, I need a financial advisor. And it needs to turn into, I'm a 57-year-old recently retired corporate executive with a concentrated equity position, and I need a financial advisor that can help me reduce my risk and provide income.
Yeah.
That's completely different. And all of a sudden, the advisor that I'm looking for is probably not just your run-of-the-mill financial advisor. I need somebody who has specialization and expertise in working with clients like me, right? Because that's really the ultimate objective here is you need to find an advisor that serves clients that are like you.
Yeah, and I mean, that to me is massively important because it goes to the experience they have in the unique issues that you might have, right? If you're a business owner, you've got taxation considerations that you need to worry about. You've got the thought of what happens to me when I'm ready to sell my business. You have a liquidity event maybe at some point. So you want somebody who's dealt with the things that you know you're going to deal with, and they've done it not just once or twice. It's what they do. Right?
Correct. Yeah. And so we say, as going to the second objective here, you want to find an advisor that works with clients that are like you, that you need that advisor or advisory team. They need to have experience in working with people in a similar situation. They're looking to onboard new clients, and then they have the capacity and processes to serve you.
Let me explain the analogy for myself that's more pertinent than when I was not part of this industry. In recent years, you guys know one of my pastimes is having surgeries on myself. And when I meet a surgeon who does, this type of shoulder surgery or knee surgery, maybe I've researched going in. If I go to see that surgeon and the waiting room is full of people my parents' age and they have walkers and it doesn't look like anyone that I recognize, that's a kind of a red flag for me, right? So I start there and I'm asking I would like to come out of this surgery, on this sort of timeline with this sort of results to accomplish these things versus, a surgeon who specializes in just getting, 80-year-olds back to activities of daily living. Just as worthy a reason to be a surgeon, but it's just not for me. It's not the best one for me. So
Right.
I want to find someone who does this type of work on people like me to get me the best result. Because it's in the end, you're considering rapport.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone wants to see how you communicate in a face-to-face meeting with a potential financial advisor. That matters, but you've got to go a little deeper. And some of these things we're talking about, to me, remind me of my search for a doctor. When I really don't know in the end, all I can do is ask the best questions that I can, and in the end, it's a bit of a leap of faith still, but at least I've done all this work.
That's right. No, and I think that's a great analogy. And so you have a selfish objective in terms of, this is the only body that you have, right? And you're trying to be the best competitive tennis player that you can be.
Right.
And so you want to work with somebody who works with other athletes that are in a similar position where you may need your rotator cuff redone or whatever it is. But
I want the best possible result with the least possible risk.
yes, I like that. But so, one of the things that, unpack or start to, talk about in here is that what I see with a lot of clients or just investors out there and the advisors that they choose, what I would remind them is that for most of them, they have worked their entire life to be able to have what they have. If they've been a business owner, they've been the one that have turned the lights on in the morning, they've turned the lights off in the evening. They've had the stresses of running and operating that business through good economic times and bad economic times. And so after they have realized the level of financial success that they have, and they're looking for an advisor, that this isn't the time for them to be philanthropic about it and, simply say, oh, well, my golf buddy has a son who just got into the business, or their daughter's in the business and I'm going to use them. That you're not there to get somebody else's career off the ground, right? Now, that doesn't mean don't work with a younger person. Mm-hmm. If that younger person has ample support. The one thing I do want to throw in there is that, and we've talked about this in some of our other podcasts, the average age of a financial advisor in this industry is
old.
60, right? 62
60
maybe?
going north, yeah.
Yeah, and so there's a high likelihood for somebody who's looking to retire in the coming years or recently retired, that if they have a financial advisor that's anywhere close to their age, there's probably a likelihood that they're going to be retiring around the same time as their advisor.
Yeah.
And so everybody is going to be interviewing a financial advisor at some point in time. Mm-hmm. What I would counsel people is try to control the timing of when that happens the best that you can as the client. Don't wait for my advisor just inform me that I have to retire or that they're retired and they're leaving and that's prompting me to make this decision.
Right.
Right, and I'd suggest it's a good question to ask. What happens when if you're my financial advisor, what happens when you retire?
Yeah, and I think that would get into a little bit about that you have the capacity, that a team has the capacity to be able to serve you. But you're looking to establish more of a longer term type relationship with an advisor or an advisory team. And so, but when you're looking to, or when you're meeting other advisors that are working with people that are like you want somebody who's experienced, right? Or has access to those that are experienced. You probably want somebody who's also credentialed, mm-hmm. And so
we list a number of those credentials in the paper, but I actually went and looked up on FINRA's website this morning. FINRA is the regulatory organization that we are all under. Do you know how many designations that they recognize on their website? Guess.
I'm going to say 50.
It's 255.
255. Good
so
grief.
It's not to say that, there are a bunch of meaningless designations or anything out there, but the point is that these designations that advisors will have in a lot of cases are designations that say that they have expertise in a certain area or they've got knowledge of a certain topic, and so they tend to be very specialized in a lot of cases. So you have designations like a certified blockchain analyst, or there's 7 different designations around the area of divorce because of the complexities involved in that. And so these are important things, and I think if your advisor has, or a prospective advisor has these things, it helps you to go and look up what they mean, what it might mean to you. The advisor should be able to explain that to you, why this credential helps them serve you. So
100%. That's one, and that's a question that you want to prompt them to ask, right? How does the designation that you have, how does that help you serve clients that are like me?
Right.
You want to know how long they've been working with people like you. Are you the first client they have of this variety? They're smart, and they're hard worker, and you're fine working with them. Do you want to take that risk as a client? Do you want to be the 100th client that they've worked with? And so now maybe they don't necessarily have the time for you.
Yeah. And that's an interesting point that we have in the paper about an advisor looking to onboard new clients, because it's almost a loaded question to an extent, right? Every advisor would be willing to take on a new client for the right client, right? But the number of clients that they serve and the manner in which they serve them is really important. So we call out here that there are some advisors that have one client, right? They may have a billionaire family that they serve. You've got other advisors that may have hundreds or even thousands of clients, depending on the level. But to your point, it's important where you fit in the grand scheme of things. And this kind of goes back to the experience level too, right? There's nothing wrong with working with a younger financial advisor to where you might get more focus from that advisor because you're only their 15th or 20th client. But at the same time, they may not have the experience because they haven't dealt with so many over the years. So it's a balance for you, and you've got to figure out. But as
long as that younger advisor is plugged into experience,
that's right.
Right. I was once that very fresh-faced. I started in this business when I was 22 years old, and so a 22-year-old asking somebody to manage millions of dollars that they've accumulated over their life, that's hard. And the reason that somebody's going to trust you is they obviously believe that you're a trustworthy individual, should go without saying, but that you're smart, hardworking, but have access to other experience that's going to back you up. One of the things that we talk about in the paper is that when you're interviewing advisors, though, and you're trying to learn about the experience they have in working with other people like you, that you also want to ask them about the successes they've had in working with people, but you also want to ask them about the failures that they've had. We learn more from failure than we do from success, and so I think that you should ask an advisor about what failures they've had in working with clients over time. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they did something wrong, but when something didn't work out, what was behind that? Did that change the way that they work with clients? Did they say this is just part of it and this can happen? But they need to be able to talk about those things. And if they can't come up with anything, that's probably a red flag. If things have not been peachy keen the entire time that they've been an advisor. Let's move on and we'll talk about the capacity to serve clients. And you hit on it just a second ago that if you're you want to work with an advisor that's going to value you as a client, but I think any client is going to be concerned about what's the prospect that I become small potatoes, maybe for somebody. And the other piece is that given that advisors are sales-oriented people, they're going to get paid more from having a new client versus not having a new client, that they can be very engaged with you in the courting process. And every relationship has a honeymoon period. And as the client, you don't want them to get caught up in that and thinking that it's probably not always going to be this way. So they really need to peer through to the future and try to find out what's my relationship going to be like with this advisor or advisory team when my relationship isn't brand new.
Right. So the question is, what systems and processes do you have in place to serve your clients, to communicate with me? How often are we going to talk? If I need you, how do I contact you best? Those sorts of things you certainly need to ask up front.
And that's something that's very specific to the individual, right? So, I mean, we have clients that, they want us to handle things for them, and they tell us, leave me alone, right? This is why I hired you guys. We've got clients that are, want us talking to them often, right? They want to know what's going on. They want to hear our voice. So it's really just, it's personal preference. It's a matter of what's right for you in your situation. Joe, to your point, in a lot of teams, especially larger advisory teams where it may not just be one advisor working by themselves, they've got folks that are in various roles that you will probably interact with. They might have sales assistants that help you. They may have folks that focus on planning in particular. And so it's not uncommon for you to have an interaction with multiple members of a team, but the advisor should be able to articulate to you up front what that interaction is going to be like. You're going to work with this person on this and this person on this, and this is how often, and all of those things. It should be easy for them to define because it should be their normal process. It's a red flag if they don't have the process.
Yeah. And at the same time, it should not be complicated if it sounds that way.
Correct.
That
Yeah.
advisor is your single point of contact for any and all topics.
That's right.
All right, the next one, and this is where the rubber meets the road, is understanding what an advisor is going to do with your money. So the planning aspect of a relationship is extremely important, and we would venture to say that every relationship needs to begin with a financial plan, or every engagement with a client needs to begin with a financial plan, and know where we're going, what we're trying to achieve for that client. But if you could have the best laid plan that gets completely wiped out with poor investment decisions. And so clients need to be able to ask a prospective advisor, what are they going to do with your money? That investment advisor that needs to be able to say, this is what my investment strategy or my process is. This is what I do for clients that are in your type of situation. I want to prompt people to ask a client or to ask an advisor, we don't control the market, so what do you do to help me manage risk?
Right.
How do you help me control risk?
So let me ask a question. Folks are coming to a financial advisor because they do not have an expertise in the financial markets, by and large, right? They're hiring somebody to do this because they want somebody who knows what they're doing. So how does a prospective client of a financial advisor get the level of detail that they need about how an advisor manages their money without, being confused by the topic? I mean, you're talking about a very complicated thing.
It's a very important question, and I would start by saying prospective clients coming in are not professionals in this business,
Right.
they have quite a varying degree of interest and experience and competence in managing their own money sometimes. There are people out there who are going to be best without a financial advisor because they're never going to have the trust that they would need in a professional because of the amount of experience that they have on the subject, and because of just some sort of inherent lack of ability to trust a professional. There are those out there. And we sometimes just have to be aware of that for ourselves because, like Stephen said, I mean, it's a sales business oftentimes, but not everyone should be your client.
Yeah.
So we have to keep that in mind. And then in terms of starting, I'd also want to add to, starting with a financial plan is an absolute first step. Many of those we speak to who have a bit of experience in managing money, you can tell by the questions they ask. You can tell very quickly their level of interest and expertise. Often you can also very quickly tell where the holes are in their understanding of important considerations, especially risk.
Right.
That's one that most do-it-yourselfers miss badly on sometimes.
Especially right now.
Yes. In an overvalued market, everybody's excited and are quite confident right now that they know what they're doing because they're making money.
Right.
Secondly, if there's something that is a common thread throughout years of conversations with prospective clients who have been managing their own money, is the idea of a complete financial plan is really not something they even think about. They tend to think everything they think tends to revolve around performance. What did they get last year? So they're missing how that tracks with their financial plan, and they're missing how much risk was involved in getting whatever return they have in their head that they see as good or not good.
Yeah.
So I'll say this: as far as in the white paper, we don't offer anything that says this is the appropriate answer to one of these questions. This is an inappropriate answer to one of these questions. It's a Goldilocks test.
Right.
But the overarching, the guideline, I would say, for people is that if a client were to ask a prospective advisor these questions that we've laid out, first of all, almost all these questions, they're open-ended. So you're trying to get that advisor to articulate and expound on something, and it needs to feel right to you as the client that they're succinct enough in being able to explain it to you. If their answer's way too short, they may not have an answer. If they bloviate and drag on, then they may be fogging, what my old marketing professor used to refer as fogging, where it goes to the, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, right?
No, fogging's a good word. I didn't know that word before I was in this business, but that one really stuck out to me as I spoke with a financial advisor who would leave me feeling he sounds like he knows what he's doing, but I didn't really understand much of anything he said.
Yeah.
And I think that's as common as anything in our business, as a prospective client might leave a meeting feeling that exact sentiment. I don't know what he was talking about. It sounded really smart, so I'm guessing he knows what he's doing.
And in my mind, I would consider that almost a huge red flag, because it may be that they're just not good at presenting what they do, but that's their job, right? I would equate it to professors that we had in school that you knew were just brilliant people, right? They were the ones who wrote the book, but they literally could not explain what they were doing to somebody at my level, right? And you're not a good teacher even if you know the subject inside and out, if you're not able to explain what you're doing. And that is literally their job. They're not, I'd also, another analogy, right? They're not, these are not guys that work on a trading desk somewhere where they're speaking a different language than any of us do, because that's how they talk to each other.
They're client-facing people.
That's, again,
right.
That's their job, right? They're there to talk to people who don't have the expertise.
Correct. And so I would venture to say that if somebody had a firm command on what they do, they could explain it in very understandable terms. It may be a very complex thing, but they could reduce it down. And for the client, when they're going through this interview process, that the ultimate objective for them is to have that advisor explain to them what they're going to do with their money in such a way that not only can the client understand it, it's not just he sounds really smart, she sounds really smart, but they understand it well enough that they could in turn explain it to somebody else.
That's the goal.
That's the goal, because the more that they understand it, the more trust they're going to have in it. And so it's critically important that they understand what that advisor is planning to do with their money, if the advisor is taking control over what their money is going to be invested in.
And I don't know if we can emphasize that enough. If you walk out of a conversation with a prospective financial advisor and you think to yourself, they sound really smart, but I didn't get it, that's a problem.
Well, and that, again, it doesn't mean that that person isn't necessarily a good advisor or is smart. Maybe they're not the right advisor for you.
Fair, yeah.
Right?
Fair.
And the objective of this entire thing is find the best financial advisor for you. I would think that having an advisor that you understand might be very helpful.
Sounds
right?
important, yeah.
The last piece that I want to touch on here, as far as the way that an advisor manages money, what they're going to do with your money, is when you're interviewing them, we can't be naive to think that everything or things are always going to come up roses with what this person does with my money. And so this goes back to a little bit asking about the failures that an advisor might have had along the way. What is going to happen when the way that they manage money, when it doesn't work? Any process or strategy has a point that it fails. Mm-hmm. And the client needs to ask the advisor, what happens to my money when this fails? My experience is that in this business or in life, that the most poignant questions, and they're not supposed to be gotcha questions, but we're just trying to be frank and get to the bottom of it, that you ask that question, and if they can respond immediately with a coherent, concise response, then that's fine. But if it's a hummina, again, you may not be in the right place.
Right.
Yeah, and you gotta. While there is some, I think, value in rapport, I think it's important. Do I enjoy speaking with this person? Do I understand what they're saying? So that matters.
Yep.
But in this conversation, I think you have to come away having some understanding, at least some basic understanding of an investment process, so that you understand that there are market situations where this might not work, but I understand and have confidence in this process that's in place that this person's going to be doing with my money. So I need to have some basic understanding beyond just sounds like a trustworthy person, sounds like a smart person. I'd say you need to go a step further and have some understanding of the process, because the risk, if you don't, is they're going to become, client, and something's going to happen next month, next quarter, in some really short period of time, and you're going to inevitably, just human nature being what it is, you're going to evaluate what they're doing negatively, based on far too short a time period to really understand it.
Yeah, and I think getting back to understanding the mechanics of whatever the process is that an advisor would use is understanding that it needs to, and having a longer term perspective in the way that they're managing money for me is helping me to achieve these longer term goals, right? How it reinforces your financial goals and objectives per your financial plan. But we've seen it in our business that a lot of times when people are evaluating their financial advisor is when something has gone wrong for them. Maybe they've lost a bunch of money in the market, and maybe they're doing that at the time when all the damage has been done. It would have been great for them to do that prior to it happening, but they need to be on board with whatever the advisor's philosophy is, and ultimately the success of their plan is going to be more dependent on their ability to stick to whatever the advisor's strategy is, rather than choosing different strategies over time.
Sure, and just having the basic understanding to help them know that if you're now managing my money and next month, I make a lot of money, that doesn't necessarily speak to how well you're managing it because it's too short a period of time. Same thing if it goes down a lot. You got to understand why to some degree from the beginning. I think that's
correct.
important.
Yeah. So again, I don't think you necessarily have to understand how the watch is made, or watch them make the watch every day, every month, but understanding how they go about evaluating things if they're making decisions on your behalf. That transparency, you're going to need that to be able to say this is the right thing for me, and it's going to give you more. It's going to give you more consolation and solace that you're doing the right thing for yourself and for your family. So let's move on here and let's go into our objective number 4, and that's understanding how advisors get paid, how they're incentivized.
This can be really confusing for some people. Doesn't need to be, but you hear that a lot.
Well, again, these people are doing a job, right? So they're getting paid. So if you go and see an advisor and they tell you there's no cost to you to be my client,
Run.
Get up and leave immediately, because there's that person's not working for free. But understanding that the way that advisors get paid, it may vary depending on the type of engagement that they're involved with. And so we lay out a couple of different ways that advisors are paid. Mike, you and I, in one of our podcasts, we talked about this in terms of peeling back the onion and what your advisor doesn't want you to know. Let's maybe drop a link to that in there. But the ways that advisors get paid could be, but not limited to, something that's transactional. It's really not as common today for the broad industry, but you go back into the 70s, 80s, 90s, where a financial advisor would have been a broker.
Right.
Every time they're on the phone with their client buying or selling something, they're getting a commission. And so there was concern back then from a regulatory perspective around churning.
Yeah. We go through a whole history lesson in this paper, just of the different ways advisors are compensated and kind of how it's progressed through time. But, part of the reason advisors today, you don't see a lot of this transactional or commission business, as we call it, is because you do it yourself, right? Go open up a E-Trade account tomorrow and, you pay next to nothing to do that kind of business. And so you don't see
Yes.
a ton of it. But good.
There are still some elements of the financial services world that do occur almost exclusively on a transactional perspective. That's insurance, alternative investments, everybody know the real estate. If you had a real estate agent buying, selling a home for you, they're getting paid at the time of the transaction. And again, their duty of care to you as the client probably ceases as soon as that transaction is done, or things are really done on a suitability basis.
Right.
Saying that maybe at the time that this transaction happened, it was an appropriate thing for you. But after that, the person, the advisor, the agent, whoever, the broker, doesn't really have any liability beyond that. Another thing that we see in the industry is what we call fee for service. That may be considered fee only by some people, where you have an advisor or advisory group that says we're charging a flat dollar amount, and that in probably most cases is just an engagement for financial planning.
The most common way you see it is, somebody will charge a client a flat fee to create a financial plan for them, and then the client takes the plan and does whatever with it after that. But that's basically the end of
they
the
may
engagement.
not, the advisor who crafts the plan for them may not have any interest in actually fulfilling the plan.
Right.
They may just say, we're going to evaluate your assets, your spending, your taxes, these sorts of things, and put together a nice financial plan for you. And they could give some recommendations in terms of, this is the way you should maybe title this, or you should invest this with this allocation, or whatever it may be, and then leave the responsibility to implement up to the client. But as soon as that engagement is over, the advisor gets paid. They may get paid up front, they may get paid some when it's over, but the advisor is simply charging a flat fee for that engagement. Now, others, and this is probably more common in the RIA space, registered investment advisors, they could potentially charge a flat fee to handle a client's financial needs each year. They may say, you're going to pay me $10,000, $20,000, whatever it is, $5,000, and I'll do ongoing planning for you. I'll give you advice and guidance on how to manage and invest your money. But that fee is prescribed, a flat dollar amount, and it doesn't matter how much money the client has.
Yeah.
If they have $500,000, if they have $100 million, they're paying a flat dollar amount for whatever that service is.
And we threw a table in here too that kind of shows you the different types of ways an advisor gets paid, and I think the way they look at this is the percentage of revenue that an advisor would get, or aggregate advisors would get from this, and the fee for service model it's a couple of percent maybe, so it's not super common.
Yeah, it's very small.
Yeah.
And I would think that you may see that in much larger operations,
Yeah.
right, in the private wealth space, where it may be a significant fee that gets paid. It may be $1 million a year that is paid, but it's going to be encompassing for everything that they do.
Right.
But yeah, we see that in the table, that it represents a very small amount of the actual fees that are charged. The arrangement that's really most common in our industry now is really the fee-based advisory. And so there's a firm on the TV that says that we do better when you do better, and they're not the only ones, because that's basically everybody these days.
They're portraying it as unique, right?
Yeah, it's kind of portrayed as unique, or they certainly don't suggest that this is something that is widely adopted in the industry. But in that scenario, you have the advisor that charges a rate to be able to manage assets for clients.
And that can vary even within that category. So you can have the asset-based fee, but in some cases that's all a client would pay. In other cases, maybe there's add-ons along within that. So maybe that doesn't include your financial plan.
Correct. Yeah, and again, the advisors, and this is why it's important to ask an advisor how do you get paid, or tell me about the different ways that you get paid. Because there may be some advisors that say, I'm going to do a financial plan for you, and it's going to take them time to do that. And so they may say, I'm going to charge you $1,000 to do your financial plan, and then I'm happy to manage the money for you or whatever else is part and parcel to that, in which case I may charge you an annual advisory fee.
Yeah.
There may be elements of that client relationship that remain transactional. It's just important to understand how is that advisor getting paid, because they're going to be potentially incentivized to lead you one direction or another. You need to understand what their incentives are and how that may reflect on their recommendations to you.
Yeah, we go through really the full history of this in the other podcast you referenced, link again. But it's interesting to see how the industry has progressed over the years. So most of the industry was in this transactional commission-based model years ago, right? It was, your broker would buy or sell stocks for you. They'd charge you for that transaction. The concern was always, was there too much trading going on, right? Were we charging this client to do trades just for the sake of doing trades? So the industry progressed to this fee-based model because of those concerns, right? The amount of transactional business that was going on. And so, by and large, the industry is really in a fee-based model. Now, you can see from the chart, it's 70+% of the revenue in the business is coming from that. But interestingly, that's led to the opposite concern, where you may have advisors charging a fee, but they're not really doing enough to manage the assets in that account. So
it's a really interesting point.
It's funny
because how that's gone. Because one thing I always think it's important, because I know you guys did a nice explanation of that in the paper. When you're sitting with a potential financial advisor and they're telling you how much their fee is, the truth is, you still don't really know how good a deal you're getting there, because if they're charging you a relatively, what sounds like a low fee, but they're not doing anything, then you're kind of getting built, right?
Yeah. So the regulation has almost swung back the other direction to now where an advisor really has to present the different options before they engage the client now, because it might make more sense for you to work with an advisor on a transactional basis. And so if you want to ask, it's called Reg Best Interest, or BI. We have that in the paper, but that's something an advisor has to disclose to you up front, because we're not saying one is the best fit for you. You have to figure out really what it is for yourself.
That's right. All right, let's wrap up here. The last objective is just other considerations that a client may want to have in their search for a financial advisor. And so one that we think is very important is the way that they interface with other professionals that you work with, your CPA, your attorney, other advisors, other financial advisors that you may have. How seamlessly do they work? Are they willing to work with those other professionals?
Right. I think the technology that's available to you at different firms might be a consideration of yours. All of these firms have a website and an app, right, where you might be able to access your assets, but there's all sorts of different tools that they now have. So figure out what those are. Some of them might be important to you. Some of them might not. And then I think the only other thing is just try to evaluate the different additional resources that firms might have to offer. So a lot of firms will offer tax trust and estate assistance. They may do things like wealth education for children. There's all sorts of different things that are now available, even within the scope of just an advisory fee. So make sure your advisor explains to you what you have at your disposal.
Awesome. Well, again, listen, the purpose of this discussion today was to be able to provide some guidelines for clients that are interviewing advisors, and knowing that they don't work in this business and they may not necessarily know the questions to ask or how to ask them. Hopefully they find some value in this discussion and in the white paper. As always, if there's anything that we can do here at Reveille to help people, encourage them to reach out. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in to this latest episode of Bugle Notes, and we will see you next time.